I never thought I'd be at war with my own neighborhood, but here we are. It all started 3 months ago when I moved into Oakridge Estates, a picturesque suburban community with manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and an HOA president named Karen Wilkins who ruled with an iron fist and a clipboard full of violations. My name is Michael and I'm an architectural engineer who works primarily from home. The house I purchased was perfect, spacious, modern, and with a detachment garage that I planned to convert into a home office. Little did I know that this renovation would trigger a suburban nightmare that would escalate to spike strips on my driveway. The day after closing, I received my first knock on the door. Standing there was a woman in her 50s, with a blonde bob haircut and sunglasses. Perched on her head, she wore a blazer, despite the summer heat, and carried a leather portfolio embossed with the neighborhood logo. Hello, I'm Karen Wilkins, president of the Oakridge Estates Homeowner Association. I wasn't notified about your move-in date in the future. All scheduling changes must be approved by the board with a minimum 14-day notice. My thoughts: is she serious right now? Who needs permission to move into their own house? I smiled politely. Nice to meet you, Karen. I'm Michael. I wasn't aware I needed permission to move into a house I purchased, but I'll keep that in mind for next time. She didn't appreciate my subtle sarcasm. Her eyes narrowed as she handed me a 3-steen binder, thick enough to stop a bullet. This is the complete Oakridge Estates covenant. Please familiarize yourself with all 437 pages. Violations begin at $50 and increase with each occurrence. I thanked her and spent that evening skimming through what could only be described as a dictator's manifesto for grass height, mailbox positioning, and acceptable shades of beige for exterior paint. It was tedious but necessary. I'd heard horror stories about HOAs and I wanted to stay on their good side. While I settled in for 2 weeks, everything was peaceful. I met some neighbors, set my home, and began drawing plans for my garage conversion. According to the covenant, renovations required board approval, so I dutifully submitted detailed architectural drawings and a comprehensive project outline for my home office. 3 days later, Karen was back at my door, this time with 2 other board members in tow. We've reviewed your application and it's been denied, she announced with what appeared to be satisfaction in her voice. May I ask why? I kept my tone professional. The covenant allows for interior renovations and my plans don't change the exterior appearance of the garage at all. Karen smiled thinly. Section 23.4 clearly states that all structures must maintain their original intended purpose. Your garage was built to house vehicles, not computers. My thoughts: that can't possibly be right. That would mean nobody could use their garage for storage or workshop either. I pulled out my copy of the covenant and flipped to the section she referenced. I don't see that language anywhere in here. It's implied. Karen insisted, color rising in her cheeks, and as board president, interpretation of the covenant falls under my authority. That evening I reread the entire section on property modifications and confirmed my suspicion. There was absolutely nothing prohibiting a garage conversion as long as the exterior remained unchanged. I decided to proceed with my plans carefully, documenting everything and ensuring I followed every actual rule to the letter. The following weekend, when the first contractor arrived to assess the space, Karen appeared in my driveway within minutes, as if she'd been watching my house. What's going on here? She demanded. I explained calmly that I was getting a quote for some interior work. She informed me that all contractor vehicles must be parked in the designated visitor spaces, not in driveways, and issued me my first violation notice, $75 for unauthorized commercial activity. My thoughts: this is getting ridiculous. She's making up rules as she goes along. I appealed the violation to the full board, providing documentation from the covenant that specifically allowed Homeowners to have service vehicles in their driveways during business hours. Reluctantly, they waived the fine, which only seemed to fuel Karen's determination over the next few weeks. I received violation notices for everything imaginable. My grass was a quarter-inch too tall. My trash can was visible from the street for 15 minutes. After collection, I had an unauthorized bird feeder in my backyard. Each time I appealed with specific references to the covenant, and each time the violations were overturned by the board. I could tell this was infuriating Karen. During one board meeting I attended, I overheard her telling another member he thinks he's so clever with his facts and documentation. We need to show him who's really in charge here. The situation escalated dramatically when my renovation began. Despite having documented everything meticulously, I received a cease and desist letter from the HOA's attorney claiming my renovation violated multiple covenants and threatening legal action if I didn't immediately halt all work and turn the garage to its original state. My thoughts: this is beyond harassment now. This is deliberate interference with my property rights. I consulted with my own attorney, who reviewed everything and assured me I was well within my rights. We sent a response letter clarifying my compliance with all legitimate regulations and warning against further harassment. I thought this would put an end to the matter, at least temporarily. I was wrong. The next morning I opened my front door to find Karen and two men installing what appeared to be a metal strip across my driveway just beyond my property line on the HOA maintained portion of the access road. What exactly are you doing? I asked, already recording the interaction on my phone. Karen straightened up with a triumphant smile. The board has approved the installation of access control devices on all community roads. This is completely within our authority. I walked closer and realized with shock that they were installing retractable spike strips, the kind that allow traffic to flow one way while puncturing the tires of vehicles going the opposite direction. They had positioned them so I could leave my driveway but couldn't return without driving over the spikes. This is insane, Karen. You can't just trap people in their homes or destroy their property. This has to be illegal. It's all perfectly legal, she countered smugly. Section 41.7 gives the HOA authority to implement security measures on common roads. If you don't like it, perhaps you should consider selling your home and moving to a neighborhood without standards. My thoughts: this woman has completely lost her mind. This isn't about rules anymore, it's about power and control. I immediately called both my attorney and the police. The officer who responded seemed bewildered by the situation but informed me it was a civil matter since the strips were installed on HO property, not my private driveway. My attorney, however, was far more helpful. They finally overplayed their hand, he said after reviewing the photos and video I sent him. What they've done violates multiple state laws regarding false imprisonment and property access. But more importantly, they've overlooked something fundamental in their own documents. He directed me to a clause I hadn't noticed before: the original community charter, which predated the current HOA covenant, included an easement agreement that guaranteed all homeowners unimpeded access to their properties from public roads. This easement was binding and couldn't be modified by subsequent HOA regulations. Better yet, the charter specified that any attempt to restrict this access would constitute a breach of contract that enable homeowners to seek triple damages for any resulting inconvenience or property damage. And since Karen had explicitly stated on camera that the purpose was to restrict my access, we had everything we needed. My attorney filed an emergency injunction that afternoon. By evening, a judge had ordered the immediate removal of the spike strips and scheduled a hearing for the following week. I printed the court order and handed it to Karen, myself recording her reaction as her face cycled through Shock, anger, and finally fear. This isn't over, she hissed, snatching the paper from my hand. Right, I agreed calmly. It's just beginning. The day before the hearing, I was surprised to receive a visit from Dave, another board member who had always seemed uncomfortable with Karen's methods. He looked nervous as he stood on my porch. Look, I just wanted you to know that not everyone on the board agreed with the spike strips. Karen pushed it through by claiming it was a security measure to prevent non-residents from using our roads as a shortcut. Most of us had no idea it was specifically targeting you until it was already in. Stalled my thoughts, so she lied to her own board members. This keeps getting better. I thanked her for coming forward and asked if he'd be willing to provide a statement. He hesitated but eventually agreed. Karen's been running this neighborhood like her personal kingdom for too long. Did you know she fined an elderly couple last winter because they couldn't shovel their walkway fast enough after a snowstorm? The husband had just had heart surgery. By the time the hearing arrived, 3 other board members had contacted me with similar stories. It seemed Karen's reign of terror had affected more than just me, but most residents were too intimidated to stand up to her. Armed with these new statements and my meticulous documentation, I felt confident as I entered the courthouse. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on Tuesday. I arrived early, dressed in my best suit, with all my documentation organized chronologically. Karen arrived minutes before the proceedings began, looking significantly less confident than usual. She was accompanied by an attorney who seemed to be briefing her hurriedly in the hallway. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and piercing eyes, reviewed the materials from both sides before addressing the court. In 20 years on the bench, I've seen some outrageous HOA disputes, but this one takes the cake. Installing spike strips to prevent a homeowner from accessing their property isn't just a covenant violation, it's amount to false imprisonment and could potentially constitute criminal reckless endangerment. Karen's attorney tried to interrupt, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Moreover, the pattern of targeted harassment documented by the plaintiff shows clear evidence of a personal vendetta rather than good faith enforcement of community standards. The statements provided by other board members regarding Ms. Wilkins' misrepresentation of the purpose of these security measures is particularly troubling. The judge paused to review more documents while Karen whispered frantically to her attorney. I sat quietly, maintaining a professional demeanor despite the surge of vindication I felt. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff and orders the immediate dissolution of the current HOA board to be replaced by court-appointed trustees until a new election can be held. The plaintiff is awarded triple damages as specified in the original charter, totaling $27,000 to be paid by the HOA's insurance. I watched as Karen's face drained of all color. She gripped the table in front of her so hard her knuckles turned white. You can't do this, she whispered, then louder. You can't do this. I've run this association for 11 years. These people need me. The judge peered at Karen over her reading glasses. Miss Wilkins, not only can I do this, but I'm also referring this matter to the district attorney for potential criminal charges related to the spike strip installation. Homeowners associations exist to maintain community standards, not to serve as personal toms for power hungry individuals. Karen stood up, her body shaking. This is all his fault, she shouted, pointing at me. He moved in and immediately started breaking all our rules. He's destroying our property values with his office garage. Ms. Wilkins, control yourself or I'll hold you in contempt. The judge warned Karen. Either didn't hear or didn't care. I was protecting our community. That's my job. You don't understand what these people are like. If you give them an inch, BFF. Please escort Miss Wilkins from my courtroom, the judge ordered as the beef Approached. Karen collapsed back in her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. This isn't fair, she wept as the BFF helped her to her feet. I've given everything to this community, everything, as Karen was escorted from the courtroom, still protesting between sobs that she was just enforcing the rules. I felt no satisfaction, only relief that the nightmare was finally over. I gathered my documents, thanked my attorney, and headed home to my half-finished office, looking forward to completing the renovation in peace. But the story doesn't quite end there. As I was driving back to Oak Estates, my phone rang. It was Dave again. You won't believe what's happening, he said, his voice excited. Word of the judgment has already spread through the neighborhood. People are actually out in their front yards talking to each other. Mrs. Avery from down the block is planting wildflowers in her garden, the ones Karen made her dig up last spring for being non-conforming vegetation. The Rodriguez family is setting up a basketball hoop that Karen had forbidden. It's like the whole neighborhood is celebrating. I smiled as I turned onto our street for the first time since moving in. I saw people outside chatting across driveways, and laughing children were playing in front yards that had previously been off limits. Someone had even put up a bird feeder. The best part, Dave continued, is that we found Karen's violation journal in the HOA office. She had detailed notes on every resident, what times they usually left for work, when they brought their trash out, even which visitors came to their homes regularly. It's completely disturbing, but it also explains how she always seemed to appear the moment anyone did anything against her rules. I pulled into my driveway free of spiked strips and looked at my garage. The construction materials were still there, waiting for work to resume. But now, instead of feeling anxious about continuing the renovation, I felt excited. Hey Dave, I said when things settled down, I like to come to the next board meeting. I have some ideas about how we might revise the covenant to be a bit more reasonable. We'd welcome that, Dave replied. Actually, several people have already suggested you might want to run for the board yourself. My thoughts, me on the HOA board? That would be ironic. As I ended the call and headed inside, I noticed a small group of neighbors walking toward my house. Leading them was an elderly couple I hadn't met yet, carrying what appeared to be a welcome basket. Hello, the woman called, waving cheerfully. We the Henderson from number 42. We just wanted to properly welcome you to the neighborhood. Karen didn't allow welcome committees, said they encouraged excessive socializing, but we always thought that was the point of living in a community. I smiled and went to meet my neighbors, my real neighbors, for the first time. And as we stood chatting in my driveway, I caught a glimpse of Karen's house down the street. Through the window I could see her pacing back and forth, phone pressed her ear, gesturing wildly. But for once no one was paying any attention to Karen Wilkins and her rules. The judge's words echoed in my mind. Homeowners associations exist to maintain community standards, not to serve as personal toms. I couldn't have said it better myself.